Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Bill.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to HPK's monthly risk advisory webinar series. As Michelle said, my name is Bill Heaven. I'm a senior manager here at HPK in our risk advisory practice, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And we're going to continue with our 2021 webinar series theme of discussing cybersecurity risk. This afternoon, we're going to discuss the topic of managed service providers, often known as or referred to as MSPs. So we're going to review the concept of an MSP, the advantages of working with an MSP, as well as reviewing recent cybersecurity trends, and then towards the end, offering some tips on how to better secure your own computer network. Okay, so as we get started, our agenda is on the screen, but I want to review some housekeeping or logistical issues. So we've got all the incoming lines muted. If you do experience any issues with the webinar today, you can communicate with our monitor, Michelle, through the chat window. And we're going to try to leave about 5, possibly 10 minutes towards the end of the session to answer any questions. So as we're going through the webinar, if you come up with a question, feel free to submit it through the chat window, and then we'll queue those up and we'll address those in a group at the end of the webinar. In the Message Control Center, we have a PDF copy of today's presentation that you can download, and we're going to be recording the webinar, and we will provide links to everyone so that you could review this or send it to a colleague. But here's the 7 items we're going to cover there. I'm not going to reread them for you. We are offering CPE for the today's webinar. So these are our learning objectives that we're going to cover today, which can basically be thought of. These should be your takeaways from attending the webinar at the conclusion of today's webinar. And in order to get the CPE, you're going to have to stay on for the entire session and then answer 4 questions that are going to be brought into the webinar randomly in different parts during the webinar. The last question is a very simple one. It just simply asks you if you want to receive CPE for today's webinar, and simply answering a yes to that, and then we'll assuming you stayed on the webinar the entire time and answered the questions, we would issue you a CPE certificate. There's my bio here, and I've been with HPK for a little over 3 years, and I handle both internal ISP security responsibilities at HPK as well as having external client-facing responsibilities. This afternoon, I'm joined by one of our fellow HPK senior managers from our MSP practice out of New Jersey, referred to as HPK IT. Pawel is overseeing operations in the New Jersey office and has been with our HPK IT managed service practice for almost 9 years now. So, Pawel, is there anything that you want to tell the audience about yourself before we dive into things?
Sure, thanks, Bill. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bill mentioned, I'm a senior manager at our HPK IT office in Clark, New Jersey. I've been working with technology and doing IT consulting work since I can remember. But I learned about the MSP concept and got into the space really in 2009. And over the years, I learned pretty much all the ins and outs of MSP. And I'm excited to share some of the knowledge with you guys today.
Okay, great. Great, thanks, Pawel. So let's dive into our agenda today and cover our first topic and explore what MSPs are.
Sure. So first, let's start by defining what managed service provider really is. And the simplest short definition would be that the MSP is a company that remotely manages customers' IT infrastructure and/or end user systems, typically on a proactive basis and under subscription model. So you can think of an MSP as technically your outsourced IT department under subscription model. So that's one of the types of MSPs. There's also a co-managed MSP, a variant of that, which we'll get to it eventually later today.
So, Pawel, when did the concept of MSPs, when did that really get started?
Good question, Bill. So MSP really, the concept started in early 2000s. So prior to year 2000, it was pretty much an IT consultants, and late 1990s, we started seeing applications that allowed for remote IT access and for help desk to computers. So prior to managed services in 2000s, traditionally the tech support or break fix, as you would call, the typical client would have an issue with a network, and they would call their tech support company, and then they would arrive, and obviously, despite the expensive repeated visits and long operational interruptions, that kind of continued over the years, and then eventually MSPs were born that allowed pretty much all the small to medium-sized businesses to be proactive on being able to make sure that those networks are constantly running and operational without any downtime, and set up in a secure manner.
Good information, thanks.
So let's, there's many aspects to work that MSPs really do. And although at a basic level, MSPs can be defined as IT experts who provide outsourced IT solutions via managed service model. There's a broad range of services that MSPs can offer, wide range of companies they can also serve and support. They also use a great diversity of different tools and methodologies to run their business. So not every MSP is the same. So that's important to keep in mind. On the screen, you see that some of the types of areas that MSPs can help or expand your current IT department. As I mentioned before, MSP can potentially fully outsource your IT department, but it should also be your strategic technology advisor for any questions, suggestions related to technology. It will allow for around-the-clock help desk in a lot of cases. There are some areas that MSPs will assist in cloud technologies. So depending on an MSP and their capabilities, there is a broad range of cloud services, security services, and the typical MSP will also assure business continuity and backup as well. So I want to look at and really go over some of the basic characteristics of typical MSP. And really, if we look at the MSP model and compare what MSPs do and what their capabilities are. And when a company is looking for MSP or comparing different proposals from variety of different MSPs, it's important to understand some aspects and options that they have, whether you're looking for MSP or you already have one. Keep in mind that MSP can have a fully outsourced practice where you would outsource your entire department, IT department, to MSP, which will allow you to really use their expertise and knowledge to support your networks and monitor them. There's also an approach for bigger organizations, which might make sense, where you would keep your local IT department and then start a co-managed IT model with managed services, where you would focus on only some of the skill gaps, freeing up the time of your current IT, in-house IT, which is going to benefit your company in the long run. The other aspect on how MSPs work and how the plans are set up is really an all-you-can-eat model for a flat monthly fee, which allows you to predict your costs on a monthly basis. And a lot of times for that flat monthly fee, a variety of services are provided, which we'll get to later on in this webinar. Really, most of the MSPs are pricing their packages based on number of users or number of devices supported on the network. So if once you receive a proposal from MSP, you might see one or the other option, whether it's based on user or per device. Pretty much all the MSPs deliver their own in-house services in conjunction with some other provider services or solutions that they partner up with or resell. So it's important to know that not every MSP is going to have an in-house expertise in some of the areas. So when you look at different MSPs, be sure to understand what capabilities they have in-house, what focus they have, and really what kind of partnerships they have as you get involved with an MSP. Another aspect of agreements when you deal with MSP and look at what they can offer is service level agreement, which is SLA, which pretty much outlines the expectations to have from the MSP. For example, an expected response time for service requests submitted by the customer, on how quickly those requests will be resolved. It should be documented in your agreement with an MSP. A lot of times MSPs publish that on the website, or you can find it as part of your agreement with MSP, what those SLAs are. And also, all the MSPs will have some type of level of project management and professional services. Like I mentioned before, they are supporting your networks on a daily basis, monitoring them, patching, and doing some other services. But they also have ability and skill set to be able to deploy certain solutions, perform migrations, ERP solutions implementations, other software implementations that you might need as you grow and as you expand your business. So those are some of the common characteristics of MSPs that I wanted to share with you guys before we go farther.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pal. For those of you that do want the CPE, here's your first question that Michelle has put up on the screen here. All right, so let's move on to our second agenda item and talk about some of the different types of managed service providers.
Sure. So the term MSP traditionally was applied to infrastructure and device-centric types of services, but has expanded to include pretty much any continuous regular management and maintenance and support. So you can see on the screen some of the types of managed services. Often those solutions are bundled by provider to allow for the right mix of services to meet users or clients' expectation. So keep that in mind that not all the MSPs might have or those types of services and provide those services as part of their basic package or at all. And in some cases, they might not have the expertise in-house to bundle it in the agreement. So keep in mind that some of those areas are very common to be part of the MSP package, but in some areas, like for example, managed print services, where an MSP would be doing the maintenance of printers, replacing ink cartridges and things along those lines. In some cases, this, as an example, might not be part of your agreement, and this might not be a focus of specific MSP. Other areas, like managed security services, would be provided by MSP in some way or shape performed, and we'll get to it later on today. But there are other MSPs really focused on security services. Sometimes they are called MSSPs, which stands for Managed Security Service Providers. So keep that in mind, that there are many types of managed services, and as you partner up and have MSP oversee your systems, some of the areas might be performed and managed by your MSP, whereas others might not necessarily be within your agreement. So I mentioned that we're gonna look at a standard MSP offering. So really, any MSP will have some of the areas covered under their basic package. So if you look at the screen, pretty much everything from system management, system monitoring, help desk, cloud storage, managed backup, hardware procurement, change management, business continuity, disaster recovery, and system security. Every single MSP, to my knowledge, will have some type of solution and part of those areas covered under their basic offering. As I mentioned before, not every MSP will have the same range of the services within those areas, which we'll get to shortly.
So, Pawel, is it fair? I know you and I have talked about this a lot, but for the audience's benefit, would you say that if somebody is working with an MSP that basically they're they're good with IT security and they don't have to worry about cybersecurity, or what would your view be on that?
Yeah, good question, Bill. So pretty much the standard MSP package ensures that your IT systems are operational. So any MSP will focus on ensuring your information systems, data are available and useful to your employees and customers. And their primary focus is really administration, and really usability and performance issues is what they will deal with. And as far as it relates to security, they will provide some level of security and management of the existing setup, but really it's up to the business owner, decision maker, on what services they would like to add to additional layers of security in order to mitigate some of the risk. So I would say that pretty much having an MSP is not going to guarantee 100% of security. And if somebody, any service or any provider guarantees 100% security, that means they're most likely lying, because there's no such thing as 100% secure. We can add additional layers of security to mitigate the risk, but pretty much we see it in news. Any company is vulnerable in some way. So it's important to remember that as you have managed services, oversee your networks, to that this managing and adding additional services with your MSP is the key here. And like I mentioned, not every MSP is created equal. Some of them provide their better services and solutions and are capable of having some of the expertise in-house, where others are partnering with other solutions to provide what the client needs are. So that kind of really brings us to the next slide here, with related to what you just asked, Bill. What basic security service provider will offer as far as security? So if we focus on the part on the previous slide, security part of managed services, the basic security provided by any managed services would be pretty much a managed firewall, VPN, antivirus, anti-malware, making sure that Windows and third-party applications are being patched, and really performing vulnerability scanning on most likely quarterly basis before business review or meeting with the client, just to understand any vulnerabilities to discuss with the clients, and make sure that the backups are running and having a disaster recovery. So that's almost like a basic package that any managed service provider will be able to help with, and any package nowadays, if we look at any MSP, should have as part of their solution. So this is really a basic package, but like I mentioned, not every MSP is really created equal in their packages. So that's really important to compare proposals. If you ever receive multiple proposals from MSP, what are they really covering? What are the solutions bundled in their agreement or proposal? So some of the others security services provided by MSPs or MSSPs, which I mentioned before, managed security service providers, which have more of a focus on security only, but MSPs can as well provide all those services. So some of those services that you can see on the screen would be more of advanced solutions, like Security Operations Center, where an MSP would have an in-house dedicated security experts analyzing logs, alerting, reviewing, and creating incidents if there is action that needs to be taken. There are other services to collect logs security information and event management. That's pretty much collecting the logs to then analyze. And further EDR solutions, better EDR solutions to protect your endpoints. Besides your basic antivirus and anti-malware protection, there are some other AI solutions out there that can be provided as a service to clients. Analyzing user behavior. When are the users logging in? Are they logging in at night? Is that a common thing that's happening on the network? That's part of the service that managed services can provide usually. Having that ongoing vulnerability scanning. I mentioned vulnerability scanning should be performed at least on a quarterly basis or before meeting with the client, just to kind of review and make sure that any vulnerabilities are being patched, ports are being blocked if there's a new device added to the network by the client unknowingly without notifying MSP. This would ensure that this is being patched and blocked. So really, the ongoing vulnerability scanning is where a more advanced approach would be for that service, and not only monitoring and running those scans on a quarterly or occasional basis. It would be more on making sure and doing those scans live. So as a new device gets connected, we can see those vulnerabilities and make sure that we're patching them. Performing cybersecurity risk assessment is another service provided by pretty much any MSP, and that's also an important area to assess your current risk and additional tweaks and services that need to be performed on the network. Password managers, secure awareness training, dark web monitoring, disk encryption, single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. Those are some other services that really can improve your security on the network. MSPs can provide this as a more advanced options on the packages. And some of them include some of those services as part of their basic package. So that's why it's really important to understand what the MSP offers as part of their basic package, and what else they can offer as the company grows and as we focus more on cybersecurity for your organization.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Pawel. And just one thing before we move on to the next agenda item is, as Pawel was saying, and we're going to cover this a little bit more, but the big thing that I got from what Pawel was telling us there is that we need to communicate with our MSP and understand who's responsible for what, and not just assume that because I have an MSP that I've got, IT security covered. It's management's responsibility to control that control structure and keep tabs on the MSP. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but make sure you're talking with your MSP so you know who's covering what, and don't make any assumptions. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about advantages of working with an MSP.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the screen, you can see some of the benefits of working with an MSP. Obviously, those are huge benefits as we look at what it can offer and what it can add or expand to your current IT approach. So IT cost savings are obviously part of what MSPs can offer. We are really saving on the talent that you get with an MSP. So you have a whole team of technicians that you have to your network, overseeing, looking at your network, which would essentially cost much higher if you were to bring that expertise in-house. Besides also looking at the tools that MSPs can provide, and if you were to bring those items or purchase them in-house to protect your networks, those costs would be much higher. So definitely there's a huge benefit in that, and being able to really predict those monthly costs. As I mentioned before, help desk services, monitoring management is provided at a fixed monthly fee. So we can easily predict what it's going to cost us at the end of the month to keep the network really running and making sure there is no issues. MSP will monitor proactively, support, patch, and ensure that the systems don't go down. But if in a case where there is an issue or there is a need to assist end user, they will be readily available to assist within the SLAs. The 24/7 support services is also a benefit, and not always an in-house IT person. Or if it's a smaller organization without a dedicated IT person is able to get this as part of the managed services. So really having that 24/7 support for any end user issues is really a huge benefit, especially nowadays with everybody really working remotely and at different hours. Experience, expertise, and knowledge is another huge thing to look at. As I mentioned before, you're not only getting one person, you're getting a whole team of trained, certified technicians with their own set of skill sets and knowledge. So if there's really a need to look at a solution, a network, design a solution for a client, that expertise is not only coming from a single person, IT person that's in-house, it's coming from the whole team of experts that you have at your exposure to use if you partner up with MSP. And freeing up companies' internal resources is really key here when partnering with MSP. So you can outsource and really free up your time, whether you have a dedicated IT person in-house and you can free up his time to focus on higher level potentially issues and requests, more of managing some of the solutions that you might already have in place. Or in some cases, if there's no in-house IT person, that freeing up time would be for other resources that usually deal with IT issues. Still, even without an IT resource, they have to figure out problems, IT technology problems themselves, or really call and request service from a third-party company on a break-fix model, which is really not the best approach, as we discussed earlier. Delivering cybersecurity expertise, where you went over that in the prior slides. There's a huge number of services and expertise that MSPs and MSSPs can provide. So really, that's a huge benefit. Now with the technology and everything moving so fast, you really need a whole team of experts to be able to keep up with everything, which a lot of times an in-house IT person might not be able to cover all aspects of and areas of cybersecurity. Guidance of MSP is really important, and MSP should have regular technology business reviews with decision makers, business owners, just really guiding, advising on what the next step is as the company advances, technology advances, things change, as we know. So the technology should be really updated, and the approach sometimes change. So it's really important to have those conversations with managed service provider, and they are there to guide you with those decisions. Any help with IT in-house IT staff shortages is another benefit. your in-house IT person is on vacation, or you might be short-staffed for whatever reason. MSP is there to fill in those gaps and can provide additional resources as needed to assist with any technology issues. Providing data recovery services following the disaster. I mentioned that this is kind of a basic service of any managed service provider, and it really, any managed service provider is ready to assist with any disaster, to bring the services and network back up as quickly as possible. So not always the local IT might be able to bring in the network back up as quickly as possible as managed service provider, given the processes in place and what is going on internally in cases like this, and the different areas that they have to tackle during those situations. And then MSP provides that scalability for your organization. So as you grow, MSP will grow with your company, add additional services as needed, and so on and so forth. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, the company IT department can be outsourced completely or replaced completely, or MSP can assist or provide just a single niche service to a client. So there's different benefits here depending on the needs for the organization. We can really benefit by outsourcing all the IT services and department to MSP, or just some areas where there is a need to fill in those gaps.
Okay, so here's our next CPE checkpoint question. So Michelle, whenever we've got, there you go. All right, so moving along is like how we're going to keep checks on what our MSPs are doing for us.
Yeah, so obviously having an MSP, like I mentioned, it doesn't always mean that everything is being taken care of. So it's important to really understand your company needs and what benefits is the company looking to get by partnering up from MSP, and be in contact and ask your MSP whether they are providing those services, what you're seeking from them, and having MSP also be in the known on what those areas are of focus is going to definitely help making sure that that those additional services are being taken care of. Make sure to really monitor and review your contract with MSP on an ongoing basis, just to understand the SLAs, what's included, and as I mentioned before, technology changes. You might hear different things. The needs might change, so it's important to have those conversations with your MSP and really understand what you're getting as part of your managed service contract currently, and what potentially can be added in the future. Reviewing reports, and the MSP should provide some type of reports on your systems aging, life cycle, patching, backup. So those are some of the reports that you should be getting, and every MSP might have a different approach on sending those automatically or reviewing them with the client during the meetings or TBR. You can always also request them on on-demand basis. So that might be a good option in some cases if you don't see some of those reports. Just make sure you understand them well and you know what you're getting, and really those reports will show you that MSPs are performing the job that you agreed with them. The other good practice would be to really ask your MSP security related questions. So on a periodic basis, you can ask them specifically whether they're performing some security tasks on your network. So you can find some good examples on understanding those security areas and questions that you might want to ask. And some of the security frameworks that are out there, like CIS, NIST, VSA. Those are some of them that you can easily look up, Google, go on their websites and get those questions and frameworks, understand them at least a little bit, and ask some of those questions to your MSP whether they're doing or providing a certain approach. And then definitely undergo a cybersecurity risk assessment at least once every 2 years or more often, ideally. And this might not necessarily be your MSP doing it. You might want to hire a third-party company. HBK, for example, is offering that as a service where you can do risk assessments and perform a risk assessment, vulnerability scanning on the networks, just to check your MSP to really make sure they're doing their job and showing them the areas where they might be lacking some expertise or there might be some discrepancies on what they're really doing.
Okay, thanks, Pawel. Thanks for that plug there. That was nice of you. Let's move on to our next CPE question. And Michelle, whenever you see that we've got the majority there, we can just move on. We can make sure we try to finish on time. Okay, so now let's look at a few recent cybersecurity statistics and trends that are going on out there in the real world.
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody hears all the breaches, vulnerabilities, ransomware attacks on the news. Those are some of the stats that we're able to pull from some of the researches. So obviously, 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. There are average cost of data breach is about $3.86 million as of 2020, based on IBM's research. The average time to identify a breach in 2020 was 207 days. So it takes a while to identify those. This is based on also IBM's research. Data breaches are exposed at exposing 36 billion records in the first half of 2020. So there's a lot of breaches that are exposing your records, credentials, identities out there. Important to know. And then 68% of business leaders feel that their cybersecurity risks are increasing. So it's important to have the focus on that. And there's no surprise that COVID really brought additional options for hackers to look at, explore, phish users, additional areas where they can focus. And since the pandemic, BI reported 300% increase in reported cyber crimes. So those are some other stats that are related to really COVID and working remotely and how that relates to cybersecurity of your networks. I'm sure you've heard of some of the news, recent news about some of the things that were happening before. Some of the big news just recently was the T-Mobile data breach, which exposed personal data of over 4 million users. That just happened this month. There was ransomware attacks that shut down the gasoline pipelines. We heard of Revil ransomware that hit over 1,000 companies, hackers compromising critical flaws in Microsoft Exchange servers, exploiting those vulnerabilities of not patched systems, and then again another vulnerability with the principal of not patched systems. That's why it's really important to make sure to block those backdoors. Ports, make sure you add those additional layers of security and patch the systems. So some of the trends that we see is really moving forward, that there's going to be no change to the fact that the remote workers will continue to be targeted. Cloud breaches will increase. Cybersecurity skills gap remains to be an issue. There's really not a lot of expertise out there, and even if the company wants to hire in-house IT expertise, it's really hard to get. So a lot of times partnering with MSP just makes sense to get that expertise for your organization. IoT devices will become more vulnerable. There's more and more IT devices on the networks with 5G coming our way. That's going to be the case on more and more with more IoT devices, and there's going to be a lot of vulnerabilities that are going to come with that, just having them on the network. So that's important, and that's kind of the trend that's currently happening as we continue on. And the cybersecurity insurance is increasing, and it's going to increase, especially for those organizations that don't take appropriate approaches and risk mitigation for their organization.
Okay, and here's our last checkpoint, and this is, like I said, this is the hardest one of all, so good luck.
All right, so let's look at some of the most common types of cyber attacks. So really on the screen, and most of those attacks you guys probably are familiar with and understand. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I believe the most common ones that are important to understand is really malware, which is a type of application that can perform malicious tasks. And some strains of malware are designed to create persistent access to the network. Some are designed to spy on the user in order to obtain credentials or other valuable data, while some are simply designed to cause disruption, like ransomware. So that's one of the very common types of attacks that we see out there. Another one is phishing. So phishing is where an attacker tries to trick an unsuspected victim into handling over your credentials or access. In a lot of cases, that might be your credit card information or some intellectual property. So that's happening over a variety of ways, by going to a phishing website where you're typing in credentials thinking that you are logging in or providing that information to a company, but it's really a fake website, or it might be a phishing email or attachment that you click on that is basically providing that information to the attacker. And then the password attacks. So the password attacks is something that I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into on the next slide. I think it's important to understand some of the attacks on the passwords and how they get compromised. And then the zero-day exploit attacks. So if the systems are not being patched, there's a vulnerability in the application or system that would be a called zero-day attack, where attacker exploits those vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities that are not patched, and tries to gain access to the network. I would say those are the most common ones that we see out there. There are a number of other ones that I'm not going to go over, but you can see on the screen. It's DDoS attacks, MITM, SQL injections, DNS tunneling, BEC, business email compromise, which we also see quite often nowadays, and then cryptojacking. So as I mentioned, I wanted to look at some of the password attacks that are happening out there. So really a focus on what type of passwords you're picking, whether it's a unique password, whether it's how long it is it complex? Some of the mindset that administrators have, IT and end users, is really misleading, I would say. And if we really think about what's important when choosing your password, when we look at the password attacks that are happening out there, it's not necessarily a complexity or length of the password that's going to help in avoiding those attacks. So a lot of attacks are happening through data breaches, phishing attempts, spear phishing, malware, social engineering, hammering, proof of compromise. So those are some of the ways that the attacker can gain access or find your password. The most common one would be data breaches, where a website gets compromised. Doesn't matter what type of website, but from that compromised website, attacker will most likely have your credentials. And we'll look on the next slide really how and what's more important. So what really helps with those password acquisition attacks? So as we can see on this table, and this was research done by Microsoft, breaches are happening the most often. And like I mentioned before, a breach will provide passwords to the attacker. So it's really not important to the most important thing over here would be to make sure that you have a unique password to every single website. So password managers will help with remembering those passwords, but reusing the same password is really not the best way and approach. Phishing is another aspect that pretty much a unique password in almost all those cases will help in securing your network. Not always, as you can see on this table, a long or complex password or rotating the password will have any benefit or making it more secure. In almost all cases, the mindset should be that your password is already compromised, that the attacker was able to gain and have your password. So in those cases, what would prevent them from really logging in? So if you think about it from the mindset of, okay, my attacker already has a password, do they only have access to one website if your password is unique, or can they access it? And it's important to obviously prevent them from accessing it, even by having your password, by enabling multi-factor authentication, which is probably the most important thing to do. So let's look at, I mentioned the multi-factor authentication. So we'll look at some of the tips on what we can do to prevent cybersecurity attacks. So some of the risk mitigation tips from my experience looking at what's happening out there, what requests we're getting when we're consulting other companies and so on and so forth. It's really, you have to ensure that the systems are being patched, vulnerability scans are being performed, and they're being locked. Segregate your networks to make sure your guests are connected to a different VLAN. That's very important. Train your end users for any security awareness training and phishing tests. So that's very important because you can have the best layers of security, and the end user is really your weakest link. Implement your internal security policies if you don't have ones, and I put it in bold because it's super important to really require multi-factor authentications for all of the systems and applications that you have out there. That's going to prevent a lot of the attacks. From what we see out there, what's happening, a lot of this could have been prevented with having multi-factor authentication enabled. And pretty much we just went over using unique passwords and implementing single sign-on approach is also helping with those attacks. Test your backup and disaster recovery. In the case of disaster, you can restore the system and restore them quickly. Make sure that this is tested and you can restore them. And then create an incident response plan. So be ready for those situations. So those I would say that would be probably the most common things and focus that you should have in order to secure your network and make sure that your network and security is in a better shape than it is today.
Great. Thanks, Pawel. That was some awesome information, and we really, hopefully the audience got as much as I did out of that. That's great perspective from somebody from the MSP point of view. Let's move on to our next slide. As you can see, if you look at the clock, we're probably running a bit longer than we had anticipated, but got the contact information up there. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Pawel or myself. I see that we do have a few queued up, so we will respond directly to you if you ask the question, and we'll get that question answered for you. Again, as far as I'd like to thank Pawel for joining us today, I think that was a great insight. I would say definitely communicate with your MSP and ensure who's doing what, especially in the areas of IT security. And I like to take a minute here and throw out a save the date for September 22nd. That's going to be our next Risk Advisory Services webinar, where we're going to talk with Jennifer and Kevin Lamar of Northern Shores Services. We're going to talk about data destruction, so that should be another good topic. So, tell your colleagues, and we'll send the invites out. But that'll be on September 22nd. And I'd like to really thank everyone for attending today. And like I said, if you have questions, reach out to Pawel or myself. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for everyone.
Thanks.